Evan Turner had never expected that $22 could change the direction of his life. He was 23 years old, a quiet young man who spent most of his days working as a ranch hand for other people. His savings were small, his dreams simple, and his life steady but lonely. Every morning he woke before sunrise, worked until his hands were tired, and returned to a rented bunkhouse with no one waiting for him. One afternoon, on his way back from a supply run, Evan passed by the county bank. A small crowd had gathered outside, reading a piece of paper pinned to the front door. Curious, Evan tied his horse and walked over. The paper read, "Abandoned property auction, Old Miller Ranch starting price, $22. Evan blinked. He thought he read it wrong. $22. A whole ranch for that price. It sounded impossible, but people around him were shaking their heads. "That land's dry," one man muttered. "Fence is falling apart," another added. "Nothing grows there anymore," someone else said. "Not even worth $22. But Evan didn't feel the same way. He asked the bank clerk inside for more details. The clerk, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, shrugged. "Kid, it's not a goodbye," he warned. "The place has been empty for years. Folks say it's unlucky. But if you want it, well, no one else will bid." Evan looked down at the few bills in his pocket. He had exactly $28 left after buying supplies. If he bought the ranch, he would have almost nothing left. But something inside him whispered that this opportunity would not return. "I'll take it," Evan said. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" Evan nodded. "Yes." The bank clerk stamped the papers and handed them to him. "Well, kid, congratulations. You just bought yourself a ranch." When Evan stepped out into the sunlight, the paper in his hand felt heavier than its weight. A ranch. His own land. His own small place in the world. The idea warmed his heart. He packed the few things he had, saddled his horse, and rode toward the old Miller Ranch. The trail was long and quiet. Dry grass brushed against his boots, and dust rose behind the horse with each step. The land looked tired, as if waiting for someone to care for it. As the sun began to lower behind the hills, he finally saw the ranch. A broken fence line stood like a tired soldier at the boundary. The barn roof sagged, one corner dipping as if leaning on the wind. The small wooden cabin sat a little distance away, its door half open. Evan stopped his horse and took a deep breath. "Well, it's not much," he said softly. "But it's mine." Walked toward the cabin. The air felt strangely still, like the world was holding its breath. The closer he got, the more he noticed small things, footprints near the door. The faint mark of horseshoes and a rope lying loosely on the porch. Something felt wrong. But Evan didn't know what. He pushed the cabin door slowly. It creaked, the sound echoing in the empty room. His eyes adjusted to the dim light. There, in the center of the cabin, hanging from a wooden beam, was a young Apache girl. Evan froze. His breath caught in his throat. At first, he feared the worst. But then, by some miracle, he noticed something, a small, weak movement. Her fingers twitched. Her head moved just slightly. "Wait, she's alive," he whispered in shock. He rushed forward. His heart pounded, but his hand stayed steady. He gently lifted her upward to take her weight off the rope. With his other hand, he worked quickly to loosen the knot. The rope fell away, and he carefully lowered her to the floor. Hey, it's okay," Evan said softly, even though he knew she didn't understand him. Her breathing was shallow, but present. Her skin was warm, not cold. She opened her eyes for a moment, dark, frightened eyes that looked up at him like he was a stranger in a storm. "You're safe now," said his voice gentle. He carried her outside into the fresh air. The breeze touched her face, and her breathing slowly steadied. Evan searched for wounds or injuries, but found nothing serious. She was weak and shaken, but alive. He gave her water, holding the cup carefully so she could sip. She drank slowly, her hands trembling. She looked around, trying to understand where she was and who he was. "I'm Evan," he said softly, touching his chest. "Evan?" She didn't reply at first. Her eyes moved cautiously, studying his face. She pointed to herself weakly, Notly. She whispered. Evan smiled slightly. "Natty, he repeated gently. Her name felt warm on his tongue, like a small piece of trust had formed between them. He wrapped her in a blanket and carried her inside. The cabin felt cold and empty, so he moved her to the porch where the sunlight was gentle. He didn't want her to feel trapped inside the same place where she had suffered fear. He sat near her, giving her space, but making sure she knew he wasn't going anywhere. As the sun lowered, not as a breathing steadied, she watched him with tired eyes, trying to understand who he was. She spoke a few soft words in her language that Evan could not understand, but he understood her expression. She was afraid. She was confused. But she was alive. Evan boiled water and cooked a simple meal of beans and bread. When he offered it to her, she hesitated. She looked at him, then at the food, unsure. After a moment, she took a small bite. The warmth of the food seemed to calm her. In the evening light, Evan studied her appearance. She was young, maybe 17 or 18. Her hair was long and dark, braided on one side. Her clothes were simple and worn. She looked like someone who had been traveling or running for days. Who brought her here? Who tied the rope? Why this cabin? Evan's mind filled with questions, but he didn't push her. She needed peace first. After a while, Natalie lifted her hand and made a small gesture toward the door of the cabin. Then she shook her head quickly, fear returning to her eyes. Evan understood. She didn't want to go inside again. Not now, maybe not ever. He nodded gently. It's okay. We stay here. He lit a small lantern and sat on the porch with her. The stars began to appear, tiny lights against the dark sky. The ranch felt quiet, but not empty anymore. Evan kept watch while Natalie rested. Every few minutes, she opened her eyes to check if he was still there. And every time she saw him, she relaxed. You're safe, he repeated softly. I promise. Hours passed. The night grew colder. Evan gave her another blanket and wrapped himself in his jacket. He leaned against the porch pole, keeping his eyes on the land. He thought about his old life, the bunkhouse, the long days on someone else's ranch, the loneliness. He had bought this ranch thinking he would work the land alone, repair the fences alone, and build a quiet life alone. But he hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her. He realized something important that night. The ranch was no longer just land. It was now a responsibility. And Natalie was part of it. Just before midnight, she spoke his name softly, almost like a question. Evan, he turned toward her. Yes. She touched her chest, then touched the porch floor, then pointed to the sky. Her gestures were slow and gentle. Evan understood one part of it. Clearly she was thanking him for saving her. He shook his head softly. You don't need to thank me. But she nodded anyway, her eyes warm and grateful. Evan watched the stars again, feeling something unfamiliar but comforting. A sense of purpose. He didn't know why she was brought here or who was responsible. But he knew the truth deep inside. He couldn't leave her unprotected. He couldn't walk away. The girl on his porch had become his responsibility. And he accepted that fully. As the night settled over the ranch, Evan sat awake, guarding the quiet world around them. The land might have been abandoned, but it wasn't empty anymore. He thought again of the $22 he had spent. He had expected land. He had expected work, but he had not expected Natalie, and he knew his life would never be the same again. Evan Turner woke before sunrise the next morning. The small cabin felt different now. Yesterday, it had been a lonely, dusty place on a forgotten ranch. But today, there was quiet breathing behind him, gentle breathing that reminded him he was no longer alone. The Apache girl, whom he had rescued from the beam inside the cabin, slept on the cot he had made for her. Her dark hair rested softly against the blanket, and the morning light touched her face gently. Evan had stayed awake most of the night, making sure she was safe, checking her breathing, and making sure she had water. He still did not know much about her, not her story. Not her family, not the people who harmed her, but he knew one thing clearly. She needed protection. And he had made a silent promise to himself that he would keep her safe for as long as she needed. Outside, the morning wind moved across the empty ranch. The land was dry, the fences broken, and the barn roof bent. But the quiet space allowed Evan to think clearly. He prepared breakfast, just simple bread, boiled beans, and warm water. When he walked back inside, he found her awake. She sat upright, holding the blanket tightly, watching him with cautious eyes. Evan offered a gentle smile so she would not feel scared. "It's all right," he said softly, pointing to the food. "For you." She didn't understand the words, but she understood the kindness. Slowly, she accepted the bowl. She ate in small bites at first. Then with more confidence when she realized the food was safe. Evan sat a little distance away, giving her space. He noticed the way she looked around the cabin, her gaze touching the window. The walls, the wooden floor, almost as if checking whether she was truly safe now. The cabin had been a frightening place for her yesterday. Today, Evan wanted it to feel like a shelter. After some quiet minutes, she lifted her hand and pointed to herself. "Notley," she said slowly. Evan repeated it carefully. She nodded. A small hint of trust formed between them. He pointed to his own chest. "Evan," she said it softly. "Avon." Even though their languages were different, the exchange felt meaningful. A silent understanding grew between them, two strangers tied together by a moment of rescue and a shared need for safety. As she finished her meal, she lifted her hand and made slow gestures in the air. She pointed to the door, then made a motion like someone pulling her forward. Then she crossed her arms tightly and lowered her head as if describing fear. Evan watched closely. She was trying to explain what happened. He spoke softly, even though she couldn't fully understand. "It's okay. Take your time." She made another gesture, hands shaped like claws, then pointing outward, as if showing men moving across the land. Then she tapped the floor of the cabin, pointed to the door, and shook her head strongly. Evan realized she was telling him she had been brought here by force. She didn't want to come. She didn't trust the place, and something was happening on the land that she feared. He nodded slowly to show he understood. "You're safe now," he said again. For the next few hours, Evan cleaned the ranch yard while Notley rested. He repaired the water tub near the porch, straightened loose boards, and swept dust from the pathway. Every few minutes, he looked toward the cabin window to make sure she was all right. By late morning, he told her he needed to go into town to get food and medicine. To his surprise, she shook her head firmly and grabbed his sleeve gently, but tightly, as if asking him not to leave her alone. Evan understood. She had been abandoned and harmed recently. Being left alone inside a cabin, especially this cabin, must have been terrifying. He spoke softly. "You can come." "It's all right," she hesitated, but after a moment, she followed him. They walked slowly down the old trail leading toward the small frontier town. When they reached the edge of town, curious eyes turned toward them, mostly toward Notley, her clothing, her quiet steps, her guarded posture. All of it drew attention. Evan felt protective immediately. He kept walking, guiding her toward the general store. But he could hear whispers behind them that Turner boys got an Apache with him. Where'd he find her? "Something's wrong here. Keep your distance." Evan ignored them. He knew the frontier had long-standing tensions between settlers and Apache families, but he also knew not all stories were true. He only saw a young girl who needed help. Inside the general store, the owner, Mr. Collins, raised his eyebrows. "Morning, Evan. Everything all right?" "Just need food, blankets, and some clean cloth," Evan replied. He kept his voice steady. Mr. Collins glanced at Notley, with a look that wasn't unkind, but cautious. "Is she with you?" Evan nodded firmly. "She needs help." Collins didn't ask more questions, but the customers inside whispered among themselves. Notley stayed close behind Evan, her eyes down, her hands gripping the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. When they walked back to the ranch, Evan noticed footprints near the gate. They were fresh. Someone had been watching the place. He knelt and studied the dirt carefully. There were several boot prints, and the ground was disturbed, as if men had moved around checking something. He felt uneasy. Whoever had brought Notley to the ranch might return that evening. Evan sat outside the cabin with Notley, watching the sun slip behind the low hills. The sky shifted from orange to purple. A quiet peace surrounded them, but his thoughts were filled with questions. Who brought her here? Why this ranch? What did they want? Suddenly, Nolly pointed toward a faded mark near the barn wall. Evan hadn't noticed it before. It looked like a burned shape, almost like a brand or symbol. She stepped closer and touched it lightly, her expression serious. She made gestures against her hands pushing outward, then a sweeping motion across the land. Evan realized what she meant. Men were marking this land. Maybe claiming it. Maybe using it for something hidden. He remembered the extremely cheap price of the ranch, just $22. Maybe the price had nothing to do with the ranch's poor condition. Maybe the ranch was used for something the town didn't know about. Over the next 2 days, Evan and Nolly worked together in silence. She helped wash dishes, gathered dry branches, and clean the cabin. Evan fixed the fence posts and checked for more signs around the ranch. Each time he found fresh tracks, felt the same sinking feeling they were not alone. One afternoon, while Evan was repairing a fence, 4 men rode up on horses. Dust rose around them as they stopped near the gate. They didn't smile. Their faces were hard, their eyes colder than the morning frost. The leader, a tall man with a tan jacket, rested his hand on his saddle horn. "Afternoon, Turner," he said. "We heard you've got company here." Evan stood still. "I don't know what you mean." The man smirked. "The Apache girl. Folks saw her with you in town?" Evan felt his heartbeat quicken, but he kept his voice steady. "She needed help." "That's not your job," the man replied. "These matters are complicated. Best if you hand her over." Evan stepped closer to the fence. "No," the man narrowed his eyes. "We're not asking. We're telling." Before Evan could respond, Nolly stepped out of the cabin, standing near the door. She looked frightened, but she didn't hide. Her presence seemed to irritate the men. There, the leader said, "She belongs to people who know how to handle her kind." Evan shook his head. "She's staying here. She hasn't harmed anyone." The man's smile faded. "We'll be back," he said coldly. Then they turned their horses and rode away. As dust settled behind them, Nolly walked to Evan slowly. She touched her chest, then the cabin, and pointed at him an unspoken message. She trusted him. Evan looked out across the empty land. He knew things were getting dangerous. These men weren't just bullies. They had plans on the frontier, plans that included this ranch and the Apache families nearby. That night, Evan sat by the window with a lantern, keeping watch. Nolly slept on her cot, with her blanket wrapped tightly around her. The ranch felt quiet, but Evan sensed movement out in the darkness, whispers of danger hiding beyond the hills. He knew what he had to do. He had to take her story to the sheriff. He had to reveal what he found on the land, the tracks, the burned symbol, the pressure from the men. It was the only way to protect her. When morning came, Evan packed a small bag, filled the water jug, and saddled his horse. Nolly watched him with worried eyes. He spoke gently. "We're going to town. You're not alone." She nodded, still unsure but trusting him. Together, they started down the dusty trail toward the sheriff's office. Not knowing the danger, waiting for them more, the truth hiding behind the $22 ranch. The morning sun rose slowly as Evan Turner and Nolly walked toward the small frontier town. The trail was quiet, but Evan felt a heavy weight in his chest. He knew the decision he was making today could change everything for him. For Natalie, and for the ranch he had bought for only $22, Natalie walked close beside him. She held her blanket tightly, her steps gentle and careful. She looked around often, watching the hills, the bushes, and the open land. She was alert, as if expecting danger to appear at any moment. Evan admired her strength. Even after everything she had faced, she kept moving forward. The town came into view ahead, small wooden buildings, dusty street, and a few horses tied near the saloon. Evan led Natalie toward the sheriff's office, a simple wooden structure with a star sign on the door. He took a deep breath before entering. Inside, Sheriff Dawson sat at his desk, reading a newspaper. He was an older man with a gray mustache and calm eyes. When he looked up and saw Evan and the Apache girl standing in his doorway, his eyebrows lifted slightly. "Morning, Evan," the sheriff said. "What brings you here this early?" Evan removed his hat and held it in his hands. "Sheriff, I need your help. And I need you to listen carefully." Sheriff Dawson leaned back. "Go on." Evan explained everything from finding the ranch so cheap, to discovering Natalie inside the cabin, to the burned symbol on the barn wall, to the men who rode in and demanded that he hand her over. He kept his story clear and calm, avoiding any harsh detail. Nadi stood quietly behind him, listening to each word. When Evan finished, the sheriff stayed quiet for a moment. He rubbed his chin, thinking deeply. "You're saying someone used that ranch for something hidden," the sheriff said slowly. "Something tied to scaring off Apache families." Evan nodded. "Yes, sir." Sheriff Dawson looked at Knott. She held Evan's sleeve gently, her eyes down but her posture strong. The sheriff spoke to her softly. "Miss, did these men harm you?" Natalie understood the tone, if not every word. She nodded once, slowly. The sheriff's face changed. His calm expression turned serious and firm. "This is no small matter," he said. "This town has laws, and those laws apply to everyone." He stood from his chair and took his hat from the wall. "Evan, I'll go with you to the ranch." "I want to see that mark myself." Evan felt a deep wave of relief. "Thank you, Sheriff." But their relief was short. As Evan and the sheriff stepped out of the office with Nadi, they saw 3 of the same men from yesterday standing near the street. They leaned against the railing, pretending to be casual. But their eyes were sharp, too sharp. The tall man in the tan jacket smirked when he saw Nadi. "There she is," he said loudly. "We told you, Turner." "She doesn't belong here." Sheriff Dawson stepped forward. "That's enough," he said firmly. "You men keep your distance," the leader shrugged. "Just watching out for the town, Sheriff?" "Oh." The sheriff gave him a hard look. "I'll decide what's best for this town." The men didn't reply, but their eyes followed Evan and Nali as they walked to the sheriff's wagon. Evan felt Notley tremble slightly beside him. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he whispered. "We're not alone now." The ride to the ranch took nearly an hour. The sheriff asked questions along the way, gentle questions, careful questions, trying to understand the situation clearly. Nali did her best to answer with gestures and simple words. Evan translated the meaning as best as he could. When they reached the ranch, the sheriff climbed down and walked straight to the barn wall. He kneeled to examine the burned symbol. He touched the ground, checking the tracks. He even walked around the back pasture, studying the soil where the men had stood. After several minutes, he returned to Evan and Nali. His eyes were thoughtful but determined. "Evan," he said, "you were right. Someone has been using this land for something hidden, and they didn't want anyone to know." Evan nodded. He already knew that, but hearing it from the sheriff gave him a sense of safety. Sheriff Dawson then turned to Nali. He spoke slowly, choosing simple words. "We will help you. No more hiding. No more fear." Nali looked at him, unsure but hopeful. She pointed at the burned symbol and then at the hills, trying to say that other families were affected too. The sheriff understood. "I'll speak with the Apache families," he said. "They deserve to know." The next few days changed everything. The sheriff takes a CTO, and Sheriff Dawson returned to town and began asking questions, real questions. He visited nearby ranchers, spoke with traveling traders, and even sent word to the leaders of the Apache community. He wanted the truth, and he was not afraid of the men who tried to hide it. Evan and Nali stayed at the ranch, keeping watch and working together. Evan repaired the fences, fixed the porch step, and cleaned old tools. Nadi helped with preparing meals, sorting supplies, and gathering firewood. She moved with more confidence each day. Her eyes no longer held only fear. They slowly learned trust again. Sometimes she sat outside at sunset watching the sky turn golden and then pink. She would speak softly in her own language, perhaps remembering home, perhaps thanking the land. Evan did not understand the words, but he understood the feeling. One evening, while they rested on the porch, Evan looked at her and smiled gently. "You're stronger every day," he said. Noddy looked at him for a moment, then spoke his name softly. Evan Strong shook his head. No, you are, she smiled. A quiet, warm smile that made the lonely ranch feel alive. The truth comes out a week later. The sheriff returned to the ranch with important news. He arrived with 2 deputies and an Apache elder named Ni, an older man with wise eyes and a calm presence. Sheriff Dawson explained what he had discovered. Those men, he said, have been trying to take land near the water sources. They wanted the Apache families to leave the area. They thought no one would question their methods. Evan's jaw tightened. He felt anger, but he kept it controlled. The sheriff continued, We have enough proof now. The elders have shared their side. In your evidence, Evan tracks the actions. The symbol matches their reports. Then came the final words Evan hoped for. We're arresting those men today. Nolly took a deep breath, her eyes softening with relief. Tony, the elder, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and spoke to her in their language. She replied quietly, and the elder nodded with pride, as if acknowledging her courage. Sheriff Dawson asked Nolly if she could identify the men. She nodded firmly. She was gentle by nature, but she had strength when it mattered. That afternoon, the sheriff rode into town with his deputies. Evan and Nolly stayed behind for safety. Hours later, the news reached them through a passing rider. The men were arrested without trouble. Justice had begun. A new life growed. With the danger gone, the ranch slowly transformed. Apache families visited to thank Evan for protecting one of their own. They helped repair the barn, fix the water trough, and rebuild the old corral. Children ran across the field, their laughter echoing through the land. Natty felt safe among them. But she stayed close to Evan. She helped him with every task, organizing supplies, tending to the small garden, cleaning tools, and repairing blankets. She learned English a little every day, repeating Evan's words with careful effort. One day, while they worked near the pasture, Nally pointed to the hills where her people lived. Then she pointed to the ranch, finally to Evan. He understood her meaning. This place felt like home to her now. He smiled softly. You can stay as long as you want. She nodded with gratitude, her eyes warm and calm. Over time, she began teaching Evan some Apache words. She showed him how to read the wind, how to follow quiet trails, how to understand animal tracks, and how to find small but important signs in nature. Evan taught her how to fix fences, ride a gentle horse, and cook simple meals. 2 different worlds blended peacefully on the ranch, a quiet ending with a strong Mahayan Gemins later. The ranch looked completely different. The fences stood straight. The barn roof no longer sagged. The fields were cleaner, the cabin brighter, and the land more alive. Every evening, Evan and Nolly sat outside to watch the sunset together. They didn't need many words. Their quiet companionship was enough. Sometimes Apache families visited. Sometimes neighbors brought supplies. The ranch, once abandoned and feared, became a place of safety and friendship. People in town began to see the truth too. Kindness and courage could change a story completely. Evan had bought a ranch for $22. He thought it was a bargain, maybe even a mistake, but it gave him something priceless. A purpose, a partnership, and a bond built on trust, respect, and quiet strength. As the last rays of sunlight touched the land, Evan glanced at Natty. She smiled softly, a peaceful smile that seemed to say, I am safe. I am home. And for the first time since he bought the ranch, Evan felt completely certain. The greatest thing he ever found inside that dusty cabin was not fear, but a life that was meant to be saved. And a friendship that would last forever.